passive income? Simple definition from the IRS. Yes. But I'm guessing since you clicked on this video, you're not looking for the simple definition. The IRS calls it passive income because that's how they categorize the income when it comes to write-offs and depreciation. That doesn't mean that you're going to get the version of passive income that some people expect, like laying in bed and all of your bills are paid and you never have to do anything because you have that passive income. And it seems like there's a spectrum of passive income from the I have a job where I have a boss that took all the risk to make the company, so my income is passive because all I do is go to work to get the income, through that entire spectrum of investing to get your investments to make money so that you don't have to sell your time to get your income, to the type of passive income that some people seem to want where you lay in an iron lung, you don't even have to breathe for yourself, and the money rolls in. So what I'm going to talk about is owning rental properties passive income? I want you to understand that you need to pick what you mean by passive income. The IRS is just categorizing it as passive income, meaning it's not the other two types that they have, which is earned income and we call it portfolio income. So with my rental properties, when I first started investing, it did not seem very passive. I seemed like I was doing everything I could in my power to make it take more time than it needed. I had the scarcity mindset that a lot of new investors do, where I figured if I do everything myself, I'm going to save money. And if I save money, I'll have more money to invest, which technically is true. But if you don't have the time or bandwidth to handle the amount of tasks that you're taking on, you won't grow. So figuring out the balance of how passive you want your income to be is key early on. And you will have a timeline of your passive level of investment. So first, I want to cover this thing called the real estate X factor. When it comes to passive income, you need to decide how much risk you're willing to take and how much work you want to do. So think of an X, almost like an XY axis, but more of an XX axis. It's not easy to say. Words are hard. So the first X axis is the amount of risk. If you just throw your money out on lottery tickets, you have the best possible gains. If you just invested every penny you have into lottery, you could win the most amount of money. But that's the highest amount of risk because more than likely, you're just going to throw your money away. So if we go into real estate and we talk about here at the top, the most risk for the best gain would be giving up control. When it comes to investing in the stock market, if you were to invest in single stocks, you are taking the biggest risk on whether that company is going to succeed or fail, where a lot of people will diversify and invest in an index fund, which is an amalgamation of a lot of stocks put together. So you have less risk, but less opportunity for what you would call unexpected growth. So in real estate, you can buy REITs, you can invest in syndications, you can be very risky because you have no control. You can invest in short-term rentals that you could have an HOA or a municipality or a state take away your ability to invest in short-term rentals. There are states like Hawaii that require 90 days minimum. So people who purchase properties that only made sense to own if you had a short-term tenant in there are now in a pretty bad position. I'm thinking appreciation would have saved them, but they're not going to be having cash flow positive properties. They'd be able to offload them. So if you go from short-term that is risky that you could lose and you might not have tenants book rooms, to midterm, where it's a little more risky. You might have times where you don't have a tenant. It's less risky because municipalities and hotel chains aren't spending billions of dollars to try to fight you on it. And then the less risk with long-term rentals, less risk with more money down, less leverage, right? The less risk you take, the less money you're going to make, but the more secure your investment's going to be. And then you have the other axis on the x-axis, the double X axis, is how much work are you willing to do, right? So now we're going to take those syndications and those REITs and we're going to put them down here in the bottom because it's hands off. You're just throwing your money at it. So while you had the best amount of risk to have a return, you have the worst amount of return from the amount of work you're going to do because you are not doing any of the work. So you have none control. And the returns for things like dividend stocks are an average less than 2%. Well, there are some that have historically produced better than that, but across the board, the average is less than 2%. If you're looking at REITs or syndications right now, the real risk is a lot of the syndications done in the last few years were projecting rent increases like they saw in the previous 2 years, which we might not be seeing. They didn't predict in most cases that the interest rates were going to double in the last year. So you took the highest amount of risk, you did the least amount of work, you're probably not going to end up making the most amount of money because of the amount of work you did. Then you can work your way up this X factor with how much work you're willing to do. The more work you do, the less passive it is by the definition that we will use as investors, not the definition that the IRS uses. If you're lazy like me, I like to do self-managed long-term rentals. So if I had a property manager, I would make less money, but I would be more hands-off in the beginning when we first start investing. And once we have systems in place, which I'll talk about in a minute, it becomes even less hands-on than when we start. So at the bottom of this X, if you're doing the work with long-term tenants, basically you list a property, you screen tenants, you put a tenant in there, you do what I do, and I invest in properties that have aspects of the property that help limit tenant turnover. Side-by-side units, so you don't have tenants living above or below each other. I want at least 2 bedrooms and a garage because more space means more stuff, less likely to move. I want washer dryer hookups inside each unit because anybody using shared laundry or laundromat is just waiting for a place to open. Right? You can go through this list of things that helps me limit tenant turnover to keep it as low amount of work as I can. And then the property manager could possibly in the beginning make it take less work. Later on, it takes about the same amount of work to have a property manager or to self-manage if you have your systems in place. Then you go further up and you have midterm rentals. So it's almost as passive and lazy as long-term, but you have to furnish the property. You're going to have more turnover in a year. Like I've got properties with tenants that were there 16 years before I bought them and have been in there 7 years since I've owned it. Right? That's fairly passive, very limited tenant turnover. Where midterm, you're getting that 13-week to maybe 3 or 4 months total tenant turnover where you have to cycle through tenants. Then you go into long-term tenants where with me having those tenants in place for years, it's very hands-off. I have tenants that other than maybe 1 or 2 texts a year, I haven't talked to in 3 or 4 years. As you go further up the amount of work that you're willing to do, you get into midterm, short-term, self-managed short-term. You're going to be less passive because it takes more of your time, but have the opportunity for more income. So how much risk are you willing to take and how much work are you willing to do? In the first few years, the reason this doesn't seem like passive income, and I think people are accurate, is because we don't just buy a rental and the money starts showing up, right? The first phase, where some of the people watching this channel right now are in the education phase. Look how much time you're taking away from the electronic income reducer, which is what our family called the TV. You might not be binge watching as many shows. You might not be listening to music. You might not be listening to a fantasy RPG role-playing book on Audible. You might be watching YouTube to figure out how do finances work? How does financial freedom work? What is the freedom number? How do you retire early? What is real estate? What are the paths to financial freedom? Which one do I choose? All of that education time isn't passive. That is time that you dedicated to learn. Then you picked a strategy. You took the time to learn a market. That's not passive. Some people drive for dollars. I had to talk to real estate agents, get my auto searches set up, pick the market that I'm going to go, look for the asset class that was going to work. Because originally I was going to do single family houses and they don't cash flow here. So I had to shift my strategy. So in the beginning, it's all of this time that we're dedicating. That is not passive. And then we have to earn the money to invest, right? So that takes work, overtime, side hustle, working for a promotion, changing companies to increase our income while sacrificing and not expanding our lifestyle. So the work, dedication, and focus it takes to save, which is increasing income and decreasing expenses at the same time, to give us the money to invest wasn't passive. And then we need to invest the money. I'm under contract for a property right now, and in 2 days, I go to sign the documents on. I had to have searches set up. I had to filter through deals every day. I had to compare deals. I had to make an offer, have several counters back and forth where I will be making a video on how I negotiated to the price that was acceptable for me. None of that was passive. Then I'm going to own the property, which means I need to, well, this is a house hack. I need to move. which for me is calling two guys in a truck and going somewhere and saying, I'll be back at the end of the day when all my stuff is in the new place. Still not passive because I had to have the money to pay the movers. And then I'm going to relocate, which is changing all of your addresses, power, water, trash, all the things you need to do in your name. This is not passive at all to get it set up for a house hack. In this case, I'm actually doing a house hack burr. The other side of the duplex needs a full rehab. It's going to be my first one. So even if I hire a GC, making the decisions of what type of kitchen to go with, which I'm going to use the lumberjack landlord's system to get, picking the materials, getting the permits, whatever it's going to take, none of that is passive. Buying all of the real estate that I have now, which is 16 rental units before this duplex that I'm closing on, that produce a little over $17,000 a month in what I call, and the IRS calls, passive income, wasn't passive to get here. Those first few years, the saving took time, the learning the strategies took time, the finding the deals took time, learning the systems on how to communicate with tenants, developing the binder strategy, which is how I get my tenants to ask me to raise the rent, which you can find a free course on at diontalk.com. All of that took time, energy, and effort to where now I get to the position where I sit back and in my mind, it is now more passive. I developed systems to be able to invest and do this while I was working full-time and raising 3 kids. So it seemed passive compared to some of the investing strategies that I've seen, like the lumberjack landlord, where he has over 100 units and he has multiple rehabs going on at the same time. And he's doing builds and he's refinanced half his portfolio. And there's so much work that can go into it that someone tell me his income's passive. Currently, once that's in place, the rehabs are done, the financing is done, he's got his 30-year fixed rate debt, he sits back and he's got systems in place to have tenants when there's turnover. To manage my 16 units now takes me less than 2 hours a month, even when I have tenant turnover, because I have systems in place. Some people develop a system where they hire a property manager, like Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time. He has over 180 units and he has a property manager handle all of them. He's had a property manager handle them since day one. That's still going to take a couple of hours a month because he has to verify that the payments were made, probably check receipts to make sure that the work is getting done and that he had some input in what higher end materials were chosen for certain jobs, right? So it still takes some time. It's not iron lung passive where you lay there and don't even have to breathe for yourself and money shows up in your bank account. And when I started, it felt like it took 20 hours a week to manage my one tenant. And now I have it down to 2 hours a month to manage 16. And that's because, like the property manager, I need to make sure the payments were made. I need to look at a few texts and emails with my handyman, who I now have handle the issues with the tenants. So the systems in place are what let us make this as passive or as active and time consuming as we want. There are people who will set up a business where they want an LLC for every property. So they need to create it, maintain it, monitor it, file taxes on it. They want a separate bank account for every property. So they need to check each bank account. They want, some I've heard want a credit card that they use for the expenses on each property. They can make this as in-depth as you want versus my version of my business, which the entire business fits in one book. But with 16 rentals, I have one checking account, one saving account, one credit card, one Excel spreadsheet with a tab for income and expenses that I send to the CPA. You can make it as simple as you want. And with those one accounts to monitor, it's a lot more passive because I just look into one account instead of 16 LLCs with 16 bank accounts. And that to me would be ridiculous. So you choose how passive you want this to be. Because of that X factor, you could say, how much risk do I want to take? How much control do I want to give up? Do I just throw my money in a syndication? Do I just throw my money into a REIT? Do I learn the market, study the market, find the deals, rehab the deals, put tenants in place, handle this all myself to get it in place? Because once it's in place, now you have the education done. The average person doesn't need to spend as much time educating themselves as I have, because my goal was to educate myself to reach financial freedom. And then once I did, I continue to educate myself so that I can keep sharing this information with people who want to do the same thing. So that time in the beginning is going to be a lot more time consuming than it's going to be down the road. Once you have the education down, once you buy the investments, once you have your systems in place, that's when it becomes passive. And yes, there will always be the haters and trolls in YouTube world and on the Facebook groups whenever in Business Insider does an article on somebody like me or Matt or Mike, and they just jump on and say things. Well, first, this is the funniest one I see often. Being a landlord is not a job. Like, I actually want to make a video just on that specific topic, because no crap, it's not a job. That's not the point. You don't invest to make a job. You don't say, I'm a landlord, that's my job. People ask how you make your money. I'm a landlord, sure, but that's not a job. If you make a job out of it, why invest? The whole point of financial freedom was to have time freedom back for me. So every time I see that comment, it kind of makes me laugh inside. But you see a lot of comments of, it's not passive, right? So this is not somebody who's just against capitalism and owning properties and having rentals. It's somebody who's against that form of investing. They'd rather throw their money into the stock market, where they've taken the time to master that, study it, they're comfortable with it. That's the asset class that they chose. So they're attacking real estate because it's not very passive. Other than choosing to, I'm thinking it's been about 6 years since I've had to go to one of my properties. Other than when I choose to, I've chosen to go to a couple. I have this one nice lady, has a flip phone, no internet at her house. And every 6 months, I have to do this month. She gives me 6 months worth of rent checks. And I'll go and I'll say hi and I'll have a little brief social interaction with her and just say, yep, you're the tenant. I'm still here. So that's probably one of the only times I think I end up having to go to a property. And even the last time I had a friend stop by and pick it up because I'm that lazy. You choose how passive you want this to be. You choose what the definition of passive is for you. And now my rant is over. I'm going to get into the questions here. I have about a half an hour to answer any questions you have on real estate, financial freedom, bad parenting, and horrible marriage advice at your own risk. And then I have my course class today at noon. So if you're in the course, I'll see you at noon. That's a Zoom where we all get in and we deep dive into each of our portfolios and work together to help all of us reach financial freedom the lazy way. So, howdy. Got Million, Dividend Dave, Michelle, howdy. The wealth building journey. All income requires work. Heck, even winning the lottery requires expending the energy and the $2 to actually play. The mental energy it takes to pick. And this was very entertaining watching Ken McElroy the other day. I watch his content. He does have some good stuff. He needs to stay in his lane, which is large multifamily investing. And then his wife, Danielle, she invests in rent and, one rental at a time strategy. So I get a blend of their information. But during that, and Zuber talked about this on one rental at a time, Ken McElroy wasn't aware of the IRS 121 rule because it's not the asset class that he really invests in and a strategy that he's needed to use. But he also didn't understand that if you win the lottery, you have to choose. Do you receive a lump sum or a 20 and in some states, 25-year annuity? So you get paid every year for that many years. And I'm probably going to be doing a video on this. So here's the Cliff Notes version that is not articulate and not in the right order. But if you choose the lump sum, what Ken wasn't aware of is that it's reduced by 50%. Right? So if you win $20 million, it instantly becomes 10, and then it's taxed. So that 10 gets taxed. And Ken's opinion, I don't even remember what it was because he didn't understand that. So I kind of stopped listening because it would be bad advice if somebody doesn't understand the topic and they were trying to explain it. He said that you would take that because you get a better return than if you took the 25-year annuity. And my opinion for the average person that isn't an investor or is a brand new investor, that the lump sum might not be the way to go, right? 70% of lottery winners are bankrupt within 5 years. So most people don't have even the mental framework put together on how to handle the money. What would you invest in? What risks would you take? How do you create cash flow from that? The average person, not the person watching content like this that is thinking, if I saved another $5, it changes how my down payment's going to be in 6 years, right? I mean, like our minds are thinking long term. But the average person, if they take that lump sum, is more likely to just blow it, even on investments that they don't understand, versus the 20% annuity. First, yes, over 25 years, you lose to inflation, but you're getting a 100% return over 25 years. So if it's a 20-year return, that's a 5% return per year. So a guaranteed 5% return per year. 25, I'd have to do the math. But if you had the 20-year annuity, it's a 5% return every year already on the money that you're getting. Then you get an amount of money to invest, probably blow, ruin it, invest in things you don't understand, get your feet under you. And then the next year, you get that same amount to do again. And by the third or fourth year, you'd probably have your investing down. And by the fifth year, you'd regret it. And you'd wish that you'd taken the annuity, because now you have a system where you could have taken that annuity, or you could have taken that lump sum and put it to work and had a ton of money. But you didn't have that for 6 years. The average person is going to benefit from the longer set of payments coming in. If you have 3 or 4 properties, 5 or 6 rentals, a pretty good system in place, you know how you would grow, you know the strategies you would like to try because you don't have the money, you're probably the person that could take the lump sum and put it to work. That's not the average person. The statistic I saw the other day was 67% of Americans making more than $100,000 don't have $400 to handle an emergency. I always thought it was just the statistic of 67% of the general public, but this was some study, and I'll have to quote the source, but it was a large percentage, because I was looking up how many, it was almost the title of this video, how many people making more than $100,000 a year or live paycheck to paycheck. The average person shouldn't do that. And good afternoon, everyone. RAS owners, howdy, on the way to your first home showing. Awesome. You told me that yesterday in the text. Let me know how it goes. Looking for rentability and area, anything to add? So if you're going to your first showing and you're looking at the area, look at the parking, especially if it's going to be something that you house hack. So if it's a small multifamily, obviously duplex, triplex, fourplex house with an ADU, you're going to have more than one tenant living there. So make sure there's parking. If it's a house, I think in your text you said it was a house, so maybe you're looking at a house that you're going to rent by the room, divide into separate living areas or something like that, then I would definitely look at parking. The obvious ones are to look at the area as, is it under power lines? Is it by an airport? Is it by a loud club? And then look at the streets. Are there couches and mattresses laying on the side of the street, like you see up and down McKinley Avenue here in Tacoma? What do the neighbors' yards look like? You'll find in a heavily rented area that you'll find 5 or 6 cars in each thing parked up on the lawn. Pretty, you can judge by the neighborhood the type of rent you're going to charge. There are some areas like where Matt, the lumberjack landlord, invests, where you can really update the inside of the rental and change the amount of rent you're getting. Here in Washington, that's not really the case. Most people look at the area, and then you can have platinum lined, titanium, whatever, the most expensive upgrades inside the property that you want, and your rent's going to be the same, right? Rent doesn't change in Washington based on what's inside the building as much as how the neighborhood looks at it. So look at the neighborhood, make sure you're using what that neighborhood looks like in your rent comps. Where you're going, if you're REI owners, you're here in Washington, I would look at the distance to JBLM, one of the largest military bases on the West Coast, distance to the Port of Tacoma, distance to the capital, which is Olympia, distance to Seattle for your commuters. And remember, we have more commuters now because there's a lot of rural workers who only have to go into the office once or twice a week. So they've pushed out. That's why I expanded the circle of where I invest. So you might have better rents further out than they were a year ago. From that metric, which is not good for the people that have been living there, but it is good for the investors who are knowing what's happening to rents now. Trying to think off the top of the head, nothing else comes to mind, but that's where I would start with that. And then let me know how it goes. Dividend day, flying back to North Carolina today. I hope your arms don't get tired. Dad joke of the day. Fly safe. I just got back. How long have I been back? 2 days now? I got to get out of here. I've been here too long. The wealth building journey. Treat an investment property like a fruit tree. Manage it carefully, then once it's stabilized, it yields in fruit. Exactly. The stabilization phase is one of the things I think I missed at the beginning of this, but the amount of time it takes to learn the strategy and get the systems in place and then stabilize it, right? Have it maintained, have your maintenance schedule in place, getting that stabilization done. Like with Matt, he's got several rehabs going on, the lumberjack landlord. Once they're done and they're stabilized, the income is exponentially larger, and the amount of work it takes to manage those goes down. It's like inversely proportionate after it's stabilized. 0 to hero, $300 and $400 a month due to property taxes. I'm only able to make this live stream because I'm going to graduation cookout after this. Nice. 4% return over 25 years. Thank you. See, I knew somebody would do the math. I only know the 20 because of Dungeons and Dragons, the D20, everything's 5%. Rich Hilarious. Howdy. Corner lots. I get corner lots for single family house hacks. Nice. My single family house is on a corner lot. My house with a duplex is on a corner lot. How many properties are on a corner lot? 5. 5 of 7. About to be 6 of 8 corner lots. So apparently that was a part of my strategy I never thought of too. I don't know that it was something I looked for. So I'm going to have to figure out why that was such a large percentage. I love it. Dan, howdy. How is it possible to cash flow $10K a month in today's market with 17,000 a month, so not 10. I'm not sure if that's possible with today's increasing interest. I just bought a property now that's going to be adding. What will this one add? So I'm adding this one, rent out the unit I'm in, rent out the other unit, the one I'm at. So that's going to add. This move is going to add $2,800 to cash flow. So I'll be really close to 20,000 a month. So here's the difference, Dan. Thank you for asking that question. That's a great question. I actually made a video specifically on that. It has a picture of a Joker on it. And it says, why so much cash flow instead of why so serious? Because there's 2 ways to grow your rental portfolio. And one is the most popular right now because people like to brag about numbers. And it's the opposite for the people who've achieved the numbers, right? So Matt the Lumberjack Landlord and Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time both have over 100 units, but they never talk their cash flow. They don't talk because it's so unachievable mentally that people won't take the step. Zuber says get to 4. If you can get to 4 rentals, your life will change. You'll have a better retirement, or you might learn the system and then take off and add more units, right? Lumberjack Landlord has a course on, oh crap, I'm a landlord. Now what? Like, what do you do now that you're a landlord? So it's how to better stabilize, get your systems in place to make it easier to manage that many properties. But they don't talk cash flow because what they did, what Millennial Mike is doing, is they recycled capital. So the Burr method has so much hype, and from BiggerPockets, possibly it's like their cause. And there has been times when the Burr method made a lot of sense. Uptrending market, downtrending interest rates, perfect storm to do Burr methods for the last decade and do amazing, right? But they're recycling capital. A home equity line of credit, a cash out refinance, a second mortgage, a sale for a 1031, or the Burr method adds debt to an existing asset or removes an existing asset to 1031 it to redeploy the capital. So you increase the number of units and you increase the size of your portfolio with very thin margins for the first decade, maybe 15 years. Right? That first decade, every time you get more cash flow, you're adding debt, which reduces the cash flow to buy the next thing. And then at 15 or 20 years, where Zuber and Matt are at, the cash flow becomes astronomical. Brilliant move for somebody who wants to do this for 20 or 15 or 20 years. But if you want to do this in 10 years or less, I chose the other lane. So you can recycle capital. What I did is I've recycled cash flow. I've never taken out a home equity line of credit. Until this purchase I'm doing now, after reaching financial freedom, I've never done the Burr method. I actually think it's a very risky method that nobody should use in their first 5 to maybe 10 years of investing. Then I've never taken out a second mortgage. I've never done a cash out refinance. I have refinanced half my portfolio to a better interest rate, which is also one of the things that increased my cash flow, but I didn't pull any money out. I've never sold to 1031. I've actually never sold a property yet. I'm hoping that all of my properties perform better than all of my marriages and actually work until death do we part. So I have exponentially higher, sooner cash flow because I save a down payment. I buy a property. I have the binder method, which gets my tenants to ask me to raise the rent. I refinance to better interest rates. That equals cash flow. The first time I bought my rentals, when I buy them, most of them got somewhere between $400 or $500 a month in cash flow per unit. By year 3, most of them were over 8. Now they average about 1,000. I have one that was a paid off single family house that cash flows about $1,800 a month. So that one kind of skews the numbers a little, but the other ones all average more than $800 per unit, closer to $1,000 per unit, because I've never touched the equity. To redefine equity in your mind from equity, how do I tap it, to You have the ability to add debt to an existing asset. If you're going to do that, a couple of things need to happen. First, do you have a place to deploy that money that's going to make sense, to add the actual cash flow that justifies that existing debt? And second, then you decide how you tap it. HELOC, refi, second mortgage, sale, all of that happens after you decide if you want to tap the equity. The sale, for me, a lot of people are doing that strategy. I came up with a new question that I ask now. If you own a property and you're thinking about selling it, I want you to think, if you found that property in your market, you bought it in 2018, I'll use my numbers. 2018, I buy a duplex for $298,000. Right now it's worth about $580. I've seen quotes above 600. So it's basically doubled in value. Interest rates when I bought it were 6%, but I refinanced to 3%. So right now I have an asset that I bought for $298,000 with a mortgage at 3%. In my market right now, if I saw a duplex just like it for sale for $298,000 and I can get a mortgage at 3%, should I buy it? Right? I would pounce on it because it's half the price of what they are selling for, and it's half the interest rate of what people are actually getting. So if you have an existing asset that you would pounce on to buy, why would you sell it? To then invest in a market where things have doubled in price and interest rates have doubled. Order of operations on that. So yes, I absolutely think it's possible to do right now. The two properties that I made offers on and got offers accepted on and then backed out of one are from the MLS. One is with a conventional loan. One I'm doing all cash because this is going to be a self-funded BRRRR. Like I said, the other side of the duplex needs rehabs, but that $17,000 that I'm getting now happened. Half my portfolio was acquired after 2020. So it's not like I've had these for 20 or 15 or 30 years. I've had one house for a long time. The others I didn't start getting until after the housing crash, and half of my portfolio didn't come until the pandemic and the global lockdown and eviction moratorium and all the reasons why everybody said don't buy a property because everything's going to crash. So I bought as much as I could. Actually, I bought as much as I should, not could. Kind of like an all-you-can-eat restaurant should be an all-you-should-eat restaurant. Christine, howdy. This might compromise my ability to buy more house. Dion, hi. My location is perfect for medium-term rentals. Nice. I don't mind managing more or more profit, but this form of income won't count towards the purchase of the next property. So there's been an adjustment. I'm actually doing an interview pretty soon with a friend of mine named Matt, who comes to the Tacoma FI meetup. He is a midterm investor, and he has a sales background. Right, he just did an interview with Millennial Mike. You should look for that video to come out soon on Millennial Mike's channel. Once he edits it, I'm pretty sure it'll be coming out. But with Matt's sales background, and I've heard him talk at several of the meetups, he's able to take a midterm rental and do really well with it. One of the things he was talking about at one of the last meetings, so I checked with a couple of investors that are in the Seattle Investors Club, the lenders. They're looking at midterm rental income as an area average. So you might find a lender that will start looking at that as rental income to count towards your next purchase. That might have changed recently with something that's happened. I don't know. This was like a month or two ago that I was talking in there, but reach out to lenders, and maybe not like the big banks, but small local or the brokerage ones, like find your Guild Mortgage, Fairway Mortgage, and find out if there are any of them that are doing midterm area average. And I think Matt's even finding lenders that are looking at that for short-term rentals. Rich Hilarious, it alleviates parking for sure. Yeah, the corner, I think that might be an aspect of it. I've looked at parking. This new one is on a corner and had part of that. It just gives it some of the parking that it has. 0 to hero. Re-add your question. It looks like Dion might have missed it. Let me scroll up and see if I did miss it. I think I missed it. There we go. I saw the second part of it. I apologize. I missed the first part of your question. Can you shed some light on property taxes increasing since you started investing? We always talk about fixed payments, and lots of people in my sphere have said they have seen payments increase by $300 and $400 a month due to property taxes. Right. So we talk about rents going up, mortgages, and we always put a caveat. We say it this way: rents go up, mortgages basically stay the same. Right. Basically is where we put in the insurance probably doubled for. I think mine all went up. So 400, 600, whatever that's 50%. So I had a 50% increase in most of my insurances at all my properties in the last 2 years. Property taxes I've seen go up. I don't know the percentage of it, but it is 150 so a month in property tax increase. So that is a significant increase from taxes and insurance. In my area, rents went up 30 to 40%. My tenants, the rents went up 20 to 8% of gross. And property taxes isn't gross. It's the cost of it went up that amount. My insurance went up 50%. It's not the total, right? It's 50% of what the insurance costs. So while yes, my mortgages went up, I think the biggest increase might have been maybe it hit the $200 mark. So maybe if there's $300 or $400, that's why rents increase. And that's why I just did a video that's coming out with Dana, the CEO of Hemline. I asked her, why do landlords quit, right? She works with over 3,000. She has over 21,000 units on her property management software that I use. And she had a couple of really good reasons why landlords quit. My reason that after talking to several landlords, the reason that they quit, the reason that they could get a better return from a savings account, the reason that they feel like it wasn't worth their time is because they didn't raise the rents. Stephan sold some of his properties because for a decade, he didn't raise the rents. He had tenants paying 2012 rents in 2022. Those tenants, sorry, Graham, had an idiot for a landlord. So he sold it. So now they've probably been kicked out, probably had their rents jacked up, probably had the new owner say, we're going to renovate, so you have to leave. Right? Those tenants couldn't have had their rents incrementally go up every year or had the binder strategy used to get their rents to where they need it to be. And property insurance and property taxes is one of the things we present when we're talking about, look at the current evaluation of my property. This is where my taxes and insurance are going to be based off that we present to the tenant, so that when the tenant sets their rent during the binder strategy, it compensates for those increases. So I'm sorry, Zero, I missed your question there. Hope that helped. But yeah, expenses go up. That's just what you're seeing on insurance and property taxes. Zuber's saying insurance companies refuse to renew insurance. So now you have to go out and find another one, because if you have a mortgage on the property, you have to have the insurance put in place. And so you have to go hunt and find somebody who's willing to insure the property. If you don't, you get this thing called lender placed insurance, which means they don't care how much it costs. They're not going to shop around. They're just going to find the first company that will cover the mortgage. So not full replacement. They don't even care about you being made whole, just them, and you pay for it. So shop around for insurance, find the best rate, and stay on top of it. A lot of people get their insurance and then never think about it again for 30 years and could have saved money by the third or fourth year by shifting who does their insurance. Dividend Dave, matches on the side of the street, save money on the make-ready costs for your next McNeeley Airbnb. It's just smart money, people. That would fit for McNeeley. Phil, howdy. Thanks for the surprise Saturday show. Phil, hopefully you're going to be here at 12. Maybe you could join the course. Class starts at 12 today. So I will see you there in a bit, because about 10 minutes, I'm probably going to be wrapping this up. In case I missed any other questions, let me know. Okay, and then Zero, you put your question in again. Thank you again for that. Lumberjack Landlords course, thank you for that. And when you put a link to my course, thank you, I appreciate it. That is where you can book an hour with me, get the free binder course, where I also include my spreadsheet for tracking income and expenses and my seller finance letter. You get it for free in the free course. Aaron, howdy, haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you here. How do you invest to wealth? Christine, nice, thanks for answering. Awesome. Christine, I'm appreciative about the homeowner insurance coverage in Florida future. I keep hearing about the pendulum swinging in our favor, but I can't see how. I'm gonna be curious too. Rich Hilarious, what are your thoughts on the subject to push by all these creative finance gurus? So subject to, so first I want to make sure that there is one set of investors I want to separate from the subject to. So is it a strategy that can work? Sure. And you know, Michael Zuber has grown his portfolio that's huge. Lumberjack Landlord has grown his portfolio. Millennial Mike is growing his portfolio. Cody and Christian Multifamily Strategy are acquiring a large portfolio, not doing subject to, while they might do some subject to at some point. They are doing seller financed in a brilliant way, where they develop a relationship with the owners that isn't about the sale of the property, and then the sale of the property could happen, right? They have a great way of doing that. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about Christian and Cody Multifamily Strategy. And I've never met or interacted with Pace, but Pace Morby is really, when he's the subject to guy, I see him in all the feeds about subject to. It is a strategy I have no desire to play it, right? I'm trying to think of the way to put this without, all of my deals, all of them are from the MLS with a conventional loan. And this is my first cash purchase, but I'm probably going to take a loan out at the end of the BRRRR, maybe, depending on what happens with interest rates. But I don't need to. That's the only reason I did a BRRRR now. I wouldn't start with the BRRRR because it would have probably bankrupted me. I would have messed it up. So many ways you can mess up a BRRRR when you're starting out, especially like Millennial Mike. If his first two things were BRRRRs, he probably would have lost all his properties. He had properties in place. He had property management in place. He had the contractors in place. So when he got his first two BRRRRs and interest rates doubled during his BRRRRs, he was able to handle it. Right? He did it in the right chronological order. I don't know if it's right. Like the chronological order, I recommend. Get your base down, then take the risk, because there is risk with that. The subject to, it's a strategy I tried to participate in. In 2009, I was underwater on my house. I had been laid off from law enforcement, tried to rent the property, had a horrible first experience with my first tenant, and said, I can't do this. There's no way I could be a landlord. I was trying to give the house away, but I owed more than it was worth, so I couldn't even subject to it. I couldn't give the house away. So finding the person who wants to subject to, you have to build that funnel of how do you find those people. So that's a massive skill you need to learn. So it's kind of like if somebody said, why do you invest in stocks versus real estate? Is one better than the other? No, this is the one I've mastered the skill of. If I took the time, energy, and effort that I put into real estate, because let's say somehow magically I was excited by stocks like I am by real estate, and I had learned stocks, I would say stocks is a great way to invest. There are people who do it successfully, right? But you have to learn this whole skill set to do that. Versus subject to, you have to learn how to find the funnel of people. You need to learn how the process works. You need to figure out how to get the lending side of it on board with you being the buyer, right? There's all of these steps that I haven't taken to master. So if you have the bandwidth to learn that and the 1 to 2 years to develop the skill of building a big enough funnel to find the people in the right position to do subject to, we're probably in a good storm period for that. Interest rates are 6 or 7%. There are people who have mortgages at 3 or 4%. So this is the time subject to can make sense. Is it the best time to jump into it when it has a huge push of people doing it? When you can find deals on the MLS that make sense. I found two that would have made sense. One would have had to have been a 203K, what do they call it, rehab loan. The other one, I made a conventional offer right from the MLS and was going to get better than a 10% return. The owner blew that deal up by re-signing year-long leases at low rents. So sometimes the sellers are just stupid. Lumberjack Landlord says, subject to is cool, but a lot of these deals will blow up when the banks run out of business and loan volume remains low. Right. I think getting the lenders on board and taking that risk with what happens with the market in the future is not something I'm interested in. Just like I'm not interested in having an adjustable rate loan. But let's take somebody like Pace Morby. Large portfolio, a lot of experience, huge portfolio, right? I would say I'm never going to, right? Hardly ever use the term that's never, right? You know, the less a man makes declarative statements, the less apt he is to look foolish in retrospect. The Tarantino quote. But I would never do an adjustable rate mortgage. Matt has had adjustable rate mortgages because he has the Lumberjack Landlord has a portfolio so large or large enough that if something goes wrong and rates went to 20%, and he had to write a check to pay that mortgage off, who cares? Right? He could take that risk. But if you're doing subject to and it's your portfolio and you don't have the other assets like Pace does to back up something that does blow up in your face, don't think it's the system you should start with, just like Burr isn't. So it's a good question. It's fair enough. It's not the way I would go. And I like you said, I think it's too risky for the common man. You summed up everything I said in 4 minutes in one sentence. Thanks. I'm probably going to wrap this up there. I'm going to drink some water so that I have a good voice for the class that starts at 12. Because my voice seems to be scratchy today. TT, I've never heard you talk about LLCs or having one. Do you? And if you do you? And if so, how many do you have? Thanks again for what you post. Thank you very much for asking the question. I'm going to need more of the water now. So TT, that's a great question. If you haven't heard me talk about LLCs, I think you might be fairly new to the channel, or you've kind of skipped through a couple of videos, because there's something about LLCs that really bothers me. So right now there's this big push for subject to. And if you're brand new and you're trying subject to, it's probably going to blow up in your face without having the other assets to support it. There was a big push for Burr. And if you're brand new and you don't have the assets to support your mistakes, or the income to support your mistakes, and then interest rates double, or prices soften, or whatever can happen to blow, or your rehab takes too long, costs too much, you don't qualify for refinancing, you're stuck with hard money, like all these things that can blow up in your face with Burr, I wouldn't start with it. A lot of people, when they're first starting out, they will ask a very logical question. I don't know anything about this asset class. I'm asking questions. Should I have an LLC? And then my very professional term for this, morons and absolute blithering idiots who've never owned a rental property and don't know what they're talking about will start saying stupid things like, you need an LLC for the tax benefits. There are none. In 1996, the IRS determined all LLCs to be disregarded entities. It has no impact on your taxes. Then people will say other stupid things. How to demonetize your channel in 3, 2, 1 by Dion on LLC. I'm keeping it clean, Matt, kind of, thanks. So I get really upset because this brand new investor that has all of this stuff to learn, what strategy, what market, how do I attain funds, like all of the things that you need to get as a baseline to invest in real estate, you add the LLC thing and it stops them in their tracks. How do you pay yourself? What do you name it? How do you get it in place? How do you separate your finances from your LLC so that it actually is an LLC? All of this extra stuff that you need that doesn't give you any tax benefits. So then the other people say, well, you want an LLC for asset protection, of which there are none at all, zero. For a while, people talked about piercing the veil, but the 2 counties that I invest in, and a lot of counties across the United States, are taking the 1996 precedents from the IRS and disregarding LLCs. They just don't exist unless you have partners. A sole member LLC doesn't exist. When you are sued, your assets are at risk. Your LLCs are your assets. So it doesn't separate your assets the way that people think or claim that they do. And imagine that. CPAs and attorneys who make money from setting up, maintaining, and filing taxes on your LLCs will tell you that you need a bunch of them. So that's my concern. It's that new investor that gets stopped in their tracks by something that they don't need. Here are the times you should have an LLC and the reasons why I don't. If you have partners, a limited liability company will protect you from someone else's mistakes, not your own. So if you have partners, you should have an LLC. If you want to use hard money, or sometimes commercial lending with lenders, they will require that the loan go to an LLC. Makes sense. If you're going to need it for the type of loan that you're going to get it. But if you don't need to use that kind of money and you don't have partners, and let's say you want a house hack, you can't do it in an LLC. Oh, and people will say, oh, you just commit mortgage fraud, get the mortgage in your name and then move it into your LLC and hope the lender doesn't trigger the due on sale clause. Just commit fraud. That usually isn't the best source of advice. So thanks for asking about LLCs, and don't apologize. It's awesome. I am glad when somebody does, because I don't want to rant on it myself, because as a content creator, when you're trying to help people and you're saying, let me give you information to help you, there are things we want to share, right? Like I want to share, how does a single parent keep custody of their kids twice, once in California and once in Washington, states where 90% of custody goes to the mother? How did the father do it? I'd love to make those videos. Nobody would watch them. Some people have reached out with emails and I've sent you a detailed answer on this is how I did it and how you can do it. And this is what worked for me. And even though I didn't use an attorney and my exes did, right? That's content I would make. I don't want to come in here and go, I want to talk about LLCs, because I get so frustrated, right? So when somebody asks and I go, oh, here's a person I can help. If you need hard money or you're going to have partners, you should have an LLC. If you think it's going to give you asset protection or tax benefits, it doesn't. So let me clarify that for you. So when somebody's starting out, the LLC can stop them in their tracks. Now, if somebody has 5 rentals or 10 rentals and cash flow and is on the cusp of financial freedom and to sleep well at night, some little part of their caveman brain says, I want to separate my assets, and they add LLCs. I have no problem with that because it's not going to stop them in their tracks from investing. It's the new investor that just already has so much to learn. So that was a great question. Thank you. And I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you all for hanging out with me on a Saturday. Anybody who's in the course, which you can find at diontalk.com, our Zoom call starts in 8 minutes. Unless you're listening to this in Futureland, then it doesn't. Saturdays at noon for the whole month of June. I will see you in the course class. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.